time to think about that. I guess the question is, do you maintain an interest in running a site? As you know, HomesNOW has expressed an interest in that as well. I've heard through the grapevine that there's another group that we might participate in this. But where are you all at as it relates to some form of organizational structure that's sufficient for us to be able to engage?
Absolutely. So we have begun drafting our documents for our cooperative. That will be a nonprofit organization with a cooperative organizational model. So with that takes the time to discourse with the entire collective, because that's the way that our organizational structure works. We feel that we have capacity to take on this project, definitely with site operations, meal services, 24/7 volunteer presence, everything that we've been doing at C10 Camp already. The challenge then is to be able to incorporate, with all the necessary documents with the DOR to be able to be recognized as a 501c3 at the time. So we have identified a fiscal sponsor, and we are intending to have that go ahead. If not by tomorrow, then by the end of the week. And so with that, the fiscal sponsor is giving us autonomy over our organizational structure and operations. Part was the RFQ. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. I understand that the minimum qualifications of the RFQ offer some really high barriers for us to not even be considered as an eligible operator for this project. And I just kind of wanted to hear what your thoughts were around that, because it sounded like we may be able to dismiss that by case of emergency or negotiate some ways to lower those barriers.
Well, the first thing is to sort of define our terms. So RFQ, as we've been using it on this issue, has been a reference to request for qualifications, has been a request to find a temporary encampment operator that would be, by the terms of our code, eligible to run a shelter, a camp. I use the term
encampment is the terminology
for a couple of years, and if the code has changed, perhaps longer. So that's the longer term reference that we want to go operational, probably at the soonest by the spring. So that's sort of the, if you think of it in terms of short term, mid-term, and then longer term and permanent. That's what we're talking about. That's sort of the middle option. And what we're talking about is an emergency shelter that will run from now, it's been the intention to run from now or soon until springtime. So if the RFQ reference that you had with softball related to that other piece, that's sort of separate and distinctive from what we're talking about. And there are, that's a different animal, but our intention is, if this group is able to form an organization, I would probably step out of the way, and I would ask you to put together who your designees are, and have them go and speak with a team from our planning department. I do a combination of people from our planning department and our legal office to just identify whether or not this organization that you're conceiving would be able to meet the conditions, because we have some minimal conditions as government. We're not seeking to impose unrealistic barriers, but there's some minimal things, so you'd be able to go and have that conversation. And if your thinking is that formal articles of incorporation would not be filed with the Secretary of State until sometime, not immediately, maybe next week or something. It might still be valuable, just for your time and understanding, to convene a meeting with that group of staff to just go over and get a sense of what they're thinking. So, and then the idea is that in this interim period of time, while there's an encampment on the lawns of City Hall and the library, right now it's technically in violation, as you know, of Bellingham Municipal Code. And my intention, what I'd like to do, is to formally permit that as some form of special permit, so that we can then also identify some basic codes of conduct, just for health and safety, that I'm sure you're already observing and considering. So that's just in the period of time between now and when increased capacity goes operational. Yeah.
I was under the impression, based off of our last meetings, that identifying a fiscal sponsor would give us the opportunity to move forward with the shelters right away. Has that changed?
Well, no, again, I'm talking sort of two distinct things. I'm thinking and I don't know how you characterize it, but the encampment City Hall, Camp 210, is not permanent. It is, nothing lasts forever. It's existing now, and I was just pointing out that it's in technical violation of our municipal code. I am,
What the municipal code is that? From my understanding, we're just exercising our First Amendment rights.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole. The point of all of this, whether or not...
We made a distinction already that the collective and what we're seeking to do as far as our organizational structure and incorporate as a non-profit cooperative is completely separate from the occupation, the occupied protest that's happening.
Right. We're in agreement there. I'm just saying...
So I don't think that permits are necessary is all. Because
I see.
Yeah.
My concern, of course, would be also pointing out that there's some occupancy at base camp. Still, like to point out, most of these people are not them. Some of these people have come over from base camp and stated they feel safer here. I'm not going to turn them away from that basis. Am I? You know, this is exactly the problem that everybody was saying for all these years. And now here it is in our laps. This is our chance to deal with it humanely and sensibly and set a precedent, to set a model that's going to work in the future for these people.
Yeah, so if you have a different interpretation of the present Camp 210, and you think of it as an ongoing First Amendment protest, some constitutionally protected protest, and we take a different view of that because there are special use permits that are granted for that purpose, and it has a duration. It's a protest. It lasts for some period of time at which it ends. So it's not ongoing forever, ever. Obviously, if that were the reasoning used, you could utilize that to justify ongoing things all over. And I'm just making, what I'm saying, whether or not we have an agreement or disagreement on that, I'm saying that this is something that I'm going to recognize and is going to continue for some period of time. I'm not going to forcefully remove people, is what I'm saying.
I hear that.
That was my point. The point is that this will continue and be allowed. We want it to be run as safely as it can be in the interim between now and the time that the emergency encampment can happen. And hopefully between, and I recognize that this is not the group of people who utilize these other services readily, but as you know, the drop-in center is going to go online soon. The Byron Street facility, we hope, is going to go operational soon with increased capacity. Base camp is going to continue, and hopefully continue to have important capacity. And then the fourth is this new managed site that the city is going to put up. And somewhere in that mix, there will be a effort to move people to these better places. That's all I'm saying.
And I get that, and so I just really just want to make sure that we're recognizing that this group of people are the people that can't take advantage of those services. And so we maybe expand the amount of shelters that we might request, maybe expanding this site. I appreciate the Winter Haven as an option. Is there enough room for more than 50? How many can you fit there? Because really, you know, we should be maybe budgeting for 100, I'm thinking. You know?
Considering that's about how many campers we have already.
What was that, Melissa?
I said considering almost 100 is about how many campers we have already, we need to be looking at those numbers instead of the mythical lower numbers that you're pulling up.
Last night that came up, someone asked if anyone had done any kind of a count, and I didn't have an answer.
I'd say 80 to 100 easily.
It is, but yeah, we could account the library one, everything, I'd say 80 to 100 probably about the zone. And so, you know, again, from the advocate standpoint, I just want to see these people get someplace, not chased into the bushes, not chased to a place where they really can't take advantage of. Well, other places you listed, Byron Street may take a couple of these couples if we can work the magic with the OC. The OC is still the operator, right? They've got a waiting list a mile long. These people aren't going there. And they're not going back to base camp largely. Some of them have escaped base camp in their minds and they're here now, you know.
And the other ones were kicked out.
Okay, well, I think it's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in actually a little bit ago. So you did mention like Base Camp, Pirate Street, Safe and Winter Haven, the drop-in center, which maybe there might be like 2 or 3 others, depending on like if other nonprofits also open up their like ground floor doors, as well as the clean green site, which is currently also like proposed yes to us, but also to HomesNOW. So there's sort of like a bidding situation there that we're gonna really have to address. But on that note, also speaking constitutionally, regardless of you wanna look at the First Amendment or any other, it doesn't change the 9th District Court ruling that we have. And that's if there is not a single open space and bed that will be approved for every single person who would otherwise have to sleep on the street, you're still in violation of the Constitution on that.
Are you talking about Martin v. Boise?
Yeah, that is close to Bellingham.
We acknowledge the reality and the
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that like the duration that you're talking about, like the timeline, it's until there's permanent housing for everyone. Like you're gonna keep continuously running into temporary encampments. You're always gonna have to set up emergency winter shelters literally every single year. You're going to have to spend springs and summer with people like sleeping on the street or shooting up in front of stores trying to keep warm. Like these temporary encampments aren't going to stop until there's like a permanent solution. And what we're looking for is like, yeah, having like an operator of one end, like just operate like an emergency shelter is one thing, but you're going to have to start opening up like actual like housing for people, you know, like. They have to take into account that you're able to like utilize like tenant units, you know, like you as the mayor can put an actual like rent cap for the city. You know, the things you can do to make sure that this like solutions that we come up with are permanent and sustainable. Like simply put, even like a rent cap right now with the moratorium situation being so inconsistent, it's honestly like the least you could do. As well as like other like just empty buildings that are like sitting empty, instead of like allowing daylight to make more foreign and like international profits by keeping them empty, the city can purchase that and proclaim to be public housing, and you can let the tenants like take care of it. And it's actually creating more jobs and vocational training programs while having people in housing.
Do you make a distinction between rent caps and rent control?
Yes. Yeah, because mostly rent control, like historically, has worked against the working class and against people of color.
Rent control is against the law in Washington State. state, so it's gonna require a RSVW code change before someone like me is authorized to consider that.
Sure, but that's also like controlling the rent, like, it's not, I wouldn't say the same thing as having like an actual, like, cap as far as like section 8, for example, you know, like you can make it so like people are not allowed to have rent over a certain percentage of like income. Like the same as applies for section 8 housing or for other affordable housing, where it's meant to keep people essentially poor. Because like that's the way it currently works. Like if you start making more out of that income, like you lose your housing. And what we need is housing that is determined purely by your income. You know, like the city jobs and other income should not like be as like 40%, 50, not even like 100% in those cases. Like just being a college student, I know people who's like their rent is their paycheck.
Yep. A lot of those people.
I support the goal of creating permanent housing. I had an interesting meeting with a community member this afternoon who was talking about the notion of functional zero. The idea that for every person that comes in as a homeless person, there's a place for them. I mean, I support those broad goals, and that's what we're working towards. But I'd like to focus, if we could, just on this first step, which is finding an operator for this public new managed site. It sounds like, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, because we're looking for an operator to manage this emergency site, the RFQ is not applied. Is that correct?
The RFQ,
The RFQ is for more permanent housing that would be
Different type.
that's a temporary, right, that's something that we're putting out, trying to find an operator. You mentioned the Lehigh before, somebody who might likely apply for that. That is something that we think would go operational, probably not until the spring. And that's separate distinction from what we're talking about with you.
Right.
So, yeah.
So yes, it
So
doesn't.
yes, you're right.
You know, if I may, in this conversation, I don't mean to apologize. We made a lot of progress in recent talks about the possibility of softening language of what that entity might be. And largely, whether this is a co-op or a nonprofit or nonprofit co-op, it basically is still meeting the barriers right at the lines where they've been drawn by separate company, right? I mean, we're still, what for the emergency requirements, we're still going to have that insurable entity, somebody to contract with. No real softening there. Before we abandon all of this talk, since we've come this far with this lofty talk, with some ideals that I think we should not abandon, right? Is analogy with me, if you will, when I go to Blow Del Donovan, when I go swimming, when I take my children swimming at Blow Del Donovan, who takes the risk of that? Who takes on the liability? The city takes on the liability of that part of the service, right? If my child falls off the monkey bars and there was a broken rung on the monkey bars, I might sue the city, because that's who assumes the liability. And the city, I mean, let's just stretch our brains around this. In this case, then, is more vested in my recreation than the lives of the people, the very weakest among us in our streets. And I think that inference is something that we need to examine right now while we have this moment. Because this is a chance to then, and I notice we don't have Peter in the room, so it's like, come on, Peter, get to work. But really, this is something that I would like to admire before you sign on that dotted line, or at least something to promise that we're all going to look at more harder as we go on into, than a qualified, experienced group who wants to continue doing something without the presence of an RFQ. If I might, the RFQ just needs to be blown out of the water.
I know you have.
I have very strong opinion, right? I find it prohibitive, I find it hobbling, I find it, the barriers are increasing instead of decreasing for players on the ground who are experienced in doing it, and so they should not be competing for resources. Also, if I may, just visually, Foursquare, right? We all remember Foursquare?
As in Foursquare.
The game?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
right? Right here in the middle is your utility building, your showers and bathrooms and kitchen, and there, and there. Each one of these is a count. Lehigh, HomesNOW, the Collective,
The collective again.
Road to Home, the Collective again. The Collective, Or, yes, as they're pointing out, we've got 100 people out here building relationships. I have no reason to think we can't get more volunteers to fill position. If this is all on one site, say Clean Green, and collectively attend all four, the only reason we need it broken into 25 is for some cleanliness issues in the bathroom and kitchen maybe. But if you're gonna ask the collective to do work at Winter Haven and an alternative site, you're stretching their resources too. So I just want to recognize that and speak this now.
Right, so there are distinctions between the RFQ and what I had, am making available because we're utilizing, emergency powers. There's a whole series of requirements to notify neighbors and have hearings, et cetera, as it relates to, the RFQ.
Yeah.
So, but and what you talked about is a broader conversation. At the moment, the object is to take a step that improves the situation, and thus...
I'm just trying to clear the actual people that are out there, and I'm just having doubts that they can fit on Winter Haven.
I hear you. So right now, we're organizing. Maybe the process of organizing will help and might inform things down the road.
I just wanted, like I said, I need these points to be brought up now, because this is that moment.
Let's continue to work and be creative and build trust and hopefully take a step forward, which is an improvement. And we can talk about other steps thereafter. We're concentrating on this. My understanding is that next week you hope that this might be a step further along. Is there any willingness? We have to figure out when this might be able to happen.
I don't know if I got a clear understanding. Again, I said last week, you gave me the impression that by having a fiscal sponsor, that we would be able to move forward with the emergency shelters. And so now you're telling me that we need to meet with the legal department and the planning department as an organization to see if we meet the criteria to operate?
That's different than where I thought we were at last week. Where I thought we were at last week was we were still having a conversation about whether or not you were going to form as an organization.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're just talking around in circles, and my head is actually starting to spin a little bit. Where are we at, like, right now, like, in where to stop? Because he was in the room, right, and we all, like, talk about, like, from our co-op perspective, we are really pro having the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force be our fiscal sponsor. It's actually helped us to, like, operate and, like, hold, like, a lot of, like, our, like, lawful entity liabilities.
Okay, so they see the organization as far as name?
As far as just the one signature, because the way it works is it basically would be, Whatcom Human Rights Task Force would be a placeholder, and their signature would be said to be like the C/O kind of signature, which is like they sign on behalf of us until we have our own ID that we can use. And then essentially we are able to then replace our signature with our new ID with theirs. But like, the issue with that is like, it works great for like an emergency encampment. We just also want to be on the same page about like more long-term and permanent like structures and planning like moving forward, because essentially like, if we're all looking at March-ish, or they're around for when all like the emergency weather encampments are going to be looking to be like taken down and like people like start relocating at that time, then it'd be like that's perfect timing for us to have our own co-op and like have the collective all set up to start managing like more long-term and permanent sites.
Good
like,
point.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I know where you're going with that. It sounds like you found a partner with whom to collaborate in the near term. Sounds like it might be the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force. The same issue. What I said last week is that if we have a site available, we will need an operator, an entity with whom we enter into an agreement who will manage and supervise the site. I've been very broad in characterizing
I know, but we're saying that would be that signature.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that the Human Rights Task Force might be an organization, might be the that entity that we need, the organizational structure with whom we would enter into the agreement with. And they would be the formal entity that would manage and supervise the site. And then they, with site agreements, would presumably engage with you to the collective to work it.
Okay,
And maybe over time, there'll be a transfer of that formal organizational structure to your group when it's sort of officially formed. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay, that sounds like one option. A quick question. In your eye, as fast as you want to move, and the idea that the collective could easily be a co-op, nonprofit, and get an EIN number up and running in a matter of days, theoretically. Would that be enough for you to feel good about moving forward and having them do it? One concern of mine is for them to contract to get through this emergency period. And then again, we have now you can apply for a regular sheltering permit and find themselves unable to qualify, even though they're the ones that have been doing it. And that's what I'm most concerned about. And it's the same thing that we're talking about with the RFQ. That HomesNOW would not have been able to qualify for these qualifications starting out. That wouldn't have happened. That wonderful model that we get to observe.
Right. So the related but separate and distinct conversation, what we're talking about is offering a public place for a new managed site. We need an operator. And as quickly as we can get an operator, we have reason to believe that whether it's building home sites or tents, which is not the preferred preserve type, or pallets. We've got a partnership with the county and a willingness on their part to engage with us and make pallets available. So the makings are here to improve the situation and increase the capacity. And if we just finished my thought most of it. If there's a possibility with this group to do that, if it's in collaboration with the Whatcom Task Force, then we would want to get a group of people together and sit down with the staff and go over some minimum conditions. If there's disagreements, then that's where we negotiate. This is the way it works.
So that is what I'm asking. Is the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force necessary in that negotiation yet? Do you think that the collective has enough going for it, the commitment to start moving toward articles of incorporation or whatever it is they need to do for their co-op and get an EIN number going? Is that enough to start that negotiation in good faith for you? That's what my question would be. I mean, there's no reason for the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force to have to do it if the collective is enough. I'm trying to lower barriers. You understand?
I appreciate that. I think it would be valuable to have some composition of this group to meet with some of the people in our planning department and go over some terms and talk this through.
So it sounds like both of those parties should represent, maybe at that meeting then, that has the possibility that maybe the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force can jump in and say, okay, well, it doesn't look like we're meeting the requirements right now.
Well, I mean, the Human Rights Task Force, they show that they're more than able and willing
Oh, yeah.
to join
Well, I'm not even worried about them.
Yeah.
I'm saying though, I think it's really great to have as many representations of the collective as we can, and like the Human Rights Task Force is like really like stepping up into like the leadership of the collective, and I think we could all like nod that that's like really awesome with the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force to like take that on, like so much transparency and flexibility, but like later on like the collective develop and kind of its own vibe. So
Is there we don't need to disclose this right here, it would be nice when we're offline, just, so I know a number of people that are on that task force to find out who, are you a member?
I'm on board.
You're on board, so, sorry I didn't grasp that detail. It'd be nice to have a conversation and invite, again, smaller group to go in and sit down and go over some of this stuff.
How soon can that happen?
It can happen pretty soon. I mean, it does happen to be Tuesday before
Thanksgiving.
weekend when everything shuts down, but our staff will be there. If you had mentioned working towards articles of incorporation, maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought I heard you say that there'll be progress by next week on that. I mean, this could be something that theoretically, have a team go meet with them on Monday. If we've got a couple of people available and a couple of people from this group and have those conversations. I appreciate what you're saying, Marcus, about barriers, and I try to convey the hope amongst our team that we can be as open to allowance as we can, but there's some minimal things, you might disagree with it, but we've got some minimal things that are.
Well, that's what the conversation is. I'm glad to introduce these ideas, Seth, and, you know, that the city could take on its own liability for the minimum required care.
That's not there's other professionals on our staff that can address that question. I'm
glad we gave the conversation, you know, and that does end up in these contracts, so, you know.
Two questions. For liability, who is that contact? Like, who do we talk to about that?
Well, that's somebody who I would invite to the meeting that you have on Monday, and it's probably going to be somebody in our legal office.
All right, and then the second question I have is it possible to see those minimum requirements before our meeting on Monday, so we have some chance to look over them?
Can I understand that? Sure, let me talk to our team on that end and see what we can put together for you. I recognize why that would be helpful. Melissa?
Why are there requirements on housing? Like, I understand the minimum requirements, but like, it doesn't matter, they need shelter. Like, there are going to be people that cannot meet your requirements, mentally, physically, and other ways. Anytime you put, well, you can't have housing unless that's the problem.
We're talking about minimal requirements with the operator.
Okay, not the people.
Operator is going to be the entity that does the screening for who gets in. I recognize that your interests are those people who
you all thrown away, yes.
Yeah, so.
I guess just like going off of what you said about the minimum requirements, if Whatcom Human Rights Task Force were to sign as a fiscal sponsor for us, how far along in the process of incorporating our collective would we need to be by next week in order for y'all to move forward?
I don't know. I think it would be, I would need to consult and understand.
I'm really happy to show you all what we have so far.
Yeah,
you know, like, you always see like progress reports and stuff, but you know, but like Whatcom Human Rights Task Force is, you know, allowing us the autonomy to create our organizational structure, how we, as a collective and as a cooperative, we intend to operate.
Right.
So I just want to make.
You know, what would be helpful, just if you're wanting some information in advance to make Monday more efficient from your end, we could probably benefit from getting some information from you all in advance of that meeting. Use the time as best we could. If you, I don't know if it's.
Do you have a mini Zoom meeting on Sunday?
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Like just like a short, probably like maybe an hour, just all just like debriefing it, like or like a.
Well, I don't know if it would be. I think if we could get I don't know where various folks are. I mean, most people are hunkered down because Thanksgiving isn't happening in any conventional sense this year. But whether folks are going where, I don't know. Another idea though is just sharing. I think I got the gist of where you're coming from, but you could even take your thinking and your understanding and reduce it to a paragraph. I could share it with the team before we meet on Monday.
Easy.
Okay, and we'll try to get you a list of the types of bare minimum conditions that the city standards require. So should we shoot for that Monday?
Monday.
Yeah.
Is there well, let's just keep it that broad at this moment. We'll share some times. I'll find out when the windows are for our team. And we can do it. I suspect I'm going to step out of that particular meeting.
Why?
What's that?
What?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it raises interesting questions about, I've been more sort of involved in all of these meetings with you all than is certainly normal. Often, and open to changing customs, but ordinarily, staff engages and sort of gets the work, and when it comes up, they've got formed options and proposals that come before the.
He has no idea what they do there, so he's not qualified.
Well, I know about that. No, I'm often in
Is
meetings
it below
with
your
them.
pay grade?
No, it's not that at all. To be honest, staff suggested that, and I simply carried it
My
out.
concern with that though is that
Sorry, I had
since we
to say
already
that.
have all of this prior knowledge from our previous meetings, that we won't have the support, I suppose, that we need, or the understanding that you have to support where we're coming from with the planning department and the legal department. The planning department and the legal department have not met with us yet, and my understanding.
Peter has.
Peter has, yes, so he's not here today though, which I feel like could have been really valuable, but I digress.
I would accept that you're present
I would
because,
also ask that.
I agree.
because
Mm-hmm.
we've come a long way in mutual understanding about some basics together in these conversations. Among them, tents are not viable winter shelters, just a game, we should give it all.
I think we have broad agreement.
And, you know, so it's like, things like that. The things that we have, you know, but I think that we have made some progressive moves here, and it's something that I want to see as a goal going forward for this group to finish their work, to house these people, to actually get them on the roof. And where we're at with these tiny houses, I think, from my perspective, from a budgetary standpoint, as I said last night in council, you know, you buy them, you own them. You're going to have them for a number of years. You're going to reuse them. You're going to help hundreds of people in the lifetime of those shelters. You don't have to budget to buy more of them because you're not doing hotel vouchers. You're not leasing facilities left and right and burning those up. Instead, you own the shelters and you get to keep reusing them. So what you do with your budget now, because you know that these shelters are available, what you do with your budget now is just provide services that you know that we need for the people who are a wreck out there. A wreck. People who, that even with this group's very best intentions, you've got somebody who just refuses to get along with everybody in a village environment and destroys shit, whatever that is. That person's going to need shelter too. They're going to need services. And so that kind of support is something that can be budgeted for when you've secured the sheltering. Secured it, and that's my point. So like now we're in the budget, we've got budgeting for 2 years. That's why last night I was like, don't do this budget because it's not ready. Because this is in flux. And I see this, and I'm hoping that you do. So I want you in that meeting because I want you to see that with that information.
So,
I know I'm getting lofty here.
no, it's okay. The mayor,
We're observing systemic change. And changing the system means in some ways tearing the mother down. And that way, if I have your side with it, I'm sorry.
The ordinary daily schedule of the mayor is kind of intense. I'm busy, I'll put it that way. And there's a lot of, the mayor has oversight and involvement in running the city. And so lots and all the department heads, all of the public services that we provide across the board. Homelessness is one issue. As you know, all by way of saying I'm busy. I will look at my calendar on Monday. I will talk to our team. We will schedule something on Monday.
And I appreciate that. I do. And I mean to speak to that too on some level. All of our civic leaders, you know, it's like, why don't I want to be a city councilor? Because I'm not. Because I'm the guy that comes in and yells at the hall. And I said, you know, you got to pay attention to this thing. Why can I do that? Because I can spend so much more time with it than any one official can. I can spend more time with homelessness and how I can solve it and cure it than you can, no offense.
Right.
And I know that you don't have the time. a counselor can't when they're worried about the color of streetlights or bicycle paths. Instead, if you have an advocate on my level that comes in with a presentation or big something like this is something. I swear.
I just want to interject here
Thank you.
and come to like the succinct understanding for all of us
Yes.
that this is
All
an
for that.
emergency.
Yeah.
This is an emergency, and so I implore you to consider this a priority. And so I understand that you're busy.
Well, no, I just really push back on that. That's simply related to the reality of my schedule. So
I hear that.
I think that, yeah, I have taken this issue very seriously.
I hear that, but I don't know what other, I don't know what other meetings you have, but if I were to speculate, like the Parks Department, or, like any other sort of meeting that you might have, in my eyes may not be as important as having your support with us, with the planning department and the legal department on that meeting.
We don't want to get fed to your lawyer, Seth.
Okay. Well, Peter's a pretty great guy, and he, as you know, we went through.
He's been cool, but we just feel like if the brainstorming and the radical things that we have been talking about with you, if we come up on that by ourselves, they're going to row against us twice as hard. We see it every time.
In a bit of efficiency, I think it's really important that you're present. You've been here every step of the way in these meetings, and I think having you there on Monday is really valuable and necessary.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't even necessarily see myself as having to be that.
And
You do
Marcus,
there. Sure.
I just wanted to like throw in just because it maybe vaguely came up, but like I'm gonna use this as a segue to talk about like mayoral powers for all of like 2 quick seconds. Like, are you familiar with like, what you're able to do as far as like with your executive position, like the mayoral like equivalent of like executive orders, or, like proclaiming a state of emergency, or like your state of emergency rather?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Like, I don't know, like, talking about, like, don't you see, like, how you could, like, maybe utilize a lot more of, like, the stance of the state of emergency, but, because, like, we have an actual pandemic, we have the weather, which up this north is about to become, like, murderous, quite literally, and we've seen that with actual death reports already. And, like, there'd be, like, the rent cap that we're talking about, not rent control for legal reasons. But with a state of emergency, you can also have control over, like, the fact that a lot of, like, the current management groups that are running all of the complexes and, like, a lot of student housing, they control their rent based off the data that's recorded from family incomes from the college. That's not based off the city. Most of them use, all the LSDs use information from the college because their numbers are a lot higher, and they see students are able to use their student aid to cover rent most times when they need it. That puts a lot of regular civilians at a great disadvantage, and while people are about to start getting evicted because of it, you have power as a state of emergency to make sure those evictions don't happen. And you can essentially already put a stopgap on making this problem worse while you deal with it.
Well, that question of rent and the moratorium and evictions being permissible potentially soon. I don't know what the governor intends as that relates to that.
But the
And what my powers are to in that mix. We're looking very carefully at that, because I recognize the effect that's going to happen.
Potentially soon on that whole, we're looking at it. So we continue that conversation. That is an important conversation and has bearing and relevance on homelessness. So, but for this moment, right now,
You
in front
can
of
use a
us,
state executive order to help this whole process not only go by a lot faster.
where
but
my
also be a
emergency
lot more
powers
efficient.
are going to come into play, just with the setup of a new managed public site that we're discussing that you're considering being actively involved in. So that is utilizing my emergency powers. I'm using
Is that going to be done by Monday? Because that would be information that like would be necessary at this meeting, and
Is what
the
going to be
Monday.
done?
Well, I'm thinking about this Monday meeting, and if you plan to use your emergency order for like any sort of capacity for this project, and then again later for more permanent projects. And you're gonna have to like probably speak to at least a little bit of that and offer some actual like validity at the next meeting, because they're not gonna believe it is coming from us. So either you have to make the public statement before the meeting, or at least let it be known to that group of staff in our meeting.
Well, I'm in daily conversation with all of the various people that will be in that meeting on Monday. I'll share with them what we talked about today. It will be a continuation of conversations we've been having for the last week. We'll be prepared for that meeting. We'll do the best we can. I recognize we're in an emergency. I want to be able to put that new additional managed site operational as quickly as we can. I want us to be as humane as we can in the days when the Camp 210 is happening in front of City Hall. I want to mention as it relates to that, I'm going to provide electricity.
I just want to have, coordinate with us.
I'll be talking to him, in fact. So, look at, see that watch?
It's off, it's an hour off.
But then, when you look at it, it's hard to even see the dial.
Yes, it is.
That is a terrible clock, I agree.
We all can agree.
Yeah, it's awful. That styling is terrible. As a dyslexic, I'm very offended. I can't read that thing to save my life.
It's 5:05 right now, everyone.
All right, thank you, Marcus.
When we get out of here, I'm going to communicate with Eric and
Okay,
get the electrical.
thank you.
It's going to.
We very much appreciate that.
Anything the water spigot at that location would be great because that would be the.
Yeah, thank you.
Electricity in the water. It's not forever.
I get it.
It's going to be in place till we get the new managed site up.
Okay.
We can move pretty quick once we've got somebody with whom we're formally in agreement as an operator. So this is the way it works, you know, we sit down and we try to create a...
Okay, but it doesn't work. We all have to agree here. It doesn't work, or you wouldn't have 100 people on your front lawn, I'm just saying.
I'm talking very specifically about when we sit down on Monday and talk and try to negotiate things and understand each other better and reach agreements. That's what we do.
Just one question,
That's true.
and it just pertains to the site again. We are looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 people right now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we should be looking at purchases more, like the request for more homes, and looking at the possibility of a bigger site like Clean Green, to do a four-square option, letting these kids marshal their forces in one site, they'll manage everything. I think it might be wise to do that. If it's just an emergency, then that won't last forever either, right? So, and it could be a good install too. Maybe CARES dollars can pay for that hub building in the middle that all four can feed off of. That makes sense too.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that all up. Then.
The use of Clean Green is one of the sites that the city has that is potentially in the mix. It's not turnkey ready now. Beyond City Hall is. The future of the Clean Green site is an open question at the moment. Long term, that is a site that when you're really just doing urban visioning of this future of the city of Bellingham, that's a site that a number of different interests have identified for a variety of different uses. One of the ideas is that could become some kind of mixed use development for.
That's not what we need.
Boo.
I'm not talking in the near term, I'm talking long term.
Oh, even still, long term, that's not what we need.
So you're gonna deny it on the ability that somebody might buy it someday, like,
Like I said,
really?
I think all of us just had really intense flashbacks to Acid Ball Park and the whole situation that happened with Waypoint. It went to like an Irish businessman instead of actually being turned into like a proper park for like the youth.
Well, that was my way of introducing the fact that there are a number of thoughts. You express your opposition to that one particular idea. There's long-term visioning
for what the use of that public site is. And it sounds like you all have.
But the long-term vision we want is that of public good, not private greed.
As long as the long-term vision includes these people getting off the lawn and into something real, something that floats them, doesn't sink them, that seems like a good long-term vision to me.
Long-term vision should be housing our people.
Absolutely.
I can't see how we can envision anything else. Like, if I envision other towers.
I stepped in that one. Sharing with you.
No, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm just saying it's not very standard.
Honestly.
I don't really love each other because, like, no, we're not gonna, like, take it out and, like, spread a bunch of rumors right now, but we really need you to know that, like, getting another, like, for-profit building in there of some kind is going to be a lot bigger. So, like, this right here is really quiet, very, like, very well articulated range, but, like, if you were to actually just open, like, a regular, like, for-profit or commercial property of any kind in the clean green, you will have bigger protests than what you're seeing out there. What you're seeing out there.
I got a hundy on them burning it down.
An emergency relief for people. What's gonna happen when you decide to build a commercial property, or if a city lets any sort of commercial property develop on that land, you will have more outrage than you have seen in the past 4 months.
This is a preview chance of the public hearing that could happen someday. I get.
Yeah, you're already getting comments about it.
Or not.
They're not happy. Profits over people, public good, not private greed, hell yeah.
Okay.
I'm feeling the vision here, Seth. I'm feeling you. I recognize this. I think we all need to take that deep breath.
It would have been intelligent on my part if I had completely characterized the whole reference to the future visioning process and mentioned like 5, 6, 7, a number of things that could potentially be ideas.
And it's not a whole building.
And what is, you say it's not turnkey ready, what is that? What would need to happen in order to make it?
My understanding is that there's preparation that's needed at that site, and that's another conversation we can have on Monday.
That was pretty well under the way when HomesNOW was getting ready to take on that site, so there would have been enough for one site to run pretty quickly, I thought, right? Like the power drop was booked and I didn't even know if it happened. Did they get the power drop in that one corner? Because they were getting ready, and of course there's water all along the arm.
Is that information that to be sent our way before the meeting on Monday along with those minimum requirements? What we need to take
Or
care
a
of?
list of where people cities out for
Yes.
prep and ready.
Other sites too, I just like the 4 square idea because it lets everybody into one site to do that, and gets the lawn clear too.
It's efficient.
I mean, it's getting the lawn clear.
It's efficient.
It's efficient.
It's efficient. Now, maybe the port still has its stuff, but the fire is down there right on the end of the middle of everything too. But the port had offered property in the past in the homeless traffic work group, and said, we got land, we don't have to build it, but if you want land, then you can come and build a circus tent on our spot. And they were still talking
Ooh,
about
circus.
a big tent, and if they're willing to do that, maybe we should talk about this there. But whatever it is, so maybe, I just think, I'm afraid this winter maybe is not big enough. Is it?
It's not big enough.
Everybody along is I don't think so. Maybe. Had that been study done, I just don't see it.
No.
Especially if you're gonna break it up into different kitchens, because you have,
Right.
households.
All right, well,
I'm just talking logistically here for the people on the lawn, so.
I understand.
You can get a portion of them off your lawn with Winter Haven, or you can get all of them off your lawn with Clean Green or something of similar size. That's what you're looking at in reality.
And maybe we should talk to the board again on that. Maybe they do have a big enough lot for that. And that makes sense too. That's a
I
great.
reached out, so let us,
Okay.
I look forward to a good conversation on Monday. And
So do we.
share with you sites,
Okay. So I'll
share with
be,
you anticipated conditions.
minimum requirements, and then what is needed for Clean Green to be opened.
I'm happy to share that
Great.
information. And the restraints as we see it for Clean Green.
Maybe get that information as soon as possible, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What's that?
I can't hear, so I want to make sure you write down what I'm giving.
Oh, all right, okay, I got it.
Okay, as long as you tell.
Let's bring this to an end. It's after 5. I've got something else I need to get to, but we will stay in touch. We'll meet on Monday. We'll identify a time when we can do that. I will contact our Public Works Director and share with me your intended use of.
And I talked to Eric briefly about what it might look like. He said, well, it looked like you wouldn't have, like we did down there, maybe just be a spider box out there so that we can run cords to run different electric devices. It'd be nice to have a microwave or two going in the kitchen from time to time, kitchen area, food handling area. It would be nice to be able to, there is talk of the possibility of a mobile laundry rig, and I think there's enough surface there on the spider box to hit the digging that they can put a 50 amp service, whatever that might be. Ideally, we can get 50 amp service going from there, and I think there is a jump there for that. So that might open that possibility up for maybe only like 40, 30, I don't know. I haven't heard the specs of their big, but there's a possibility of a mobile washing laundry facility, and that's pretty cool. That'd be nice to get. I'd also like to see the laundry truck come in here. I know Doug's got the shower truck, I should say, excuse me, from HomesNOW is kind of contractually stuck at Unity Village and to letter permits. They don't want to step across any letters of permits these days. I can tell you that the mission, their trailer is not being used. I contacted them, and they said that they're just due to COVID, understaffed and not understaffed for some of the variables around that. But it might be nice if you could ask them if they could do a special run and spend a couple of showering with people.
They're smelly and moldy.
It would be such a boon to them. They're so happy out there, and for the stability they got, and they just all need showers.
Yeah. And as a personal
Already Hannah, there's another thing too, because there's showers there, but
Yep.
if you think about that, just really.
Yeah, on a personal note for the campers, I would just like to bring it to light to some people who aren't on the ground with us and don't see it, that at least 1/3 of our camp is choosing independently on their own to kick drugs with us because they feel safe and respected and they want a better life. These people have come to us to seek improvement in their life, and they're really trying, most of them. We have a couple of troublemakers, but everybody has that, including your own government people. So it's not any different. It's just more exacerbated due to the type of personalities that they are. But these people really, they haven't given up on themselves, and they really want to do this with us. So I just wanted you guys to know that we are seeing leaps and bounds of improvement, and we never required or asked these people to quit doing drugs. They are choosing to do that because they have seen what we have offered and they want to be a part of it and they want to stop. These people are coming specifically to us because they actually trust us, and it's showing. So
Do you just characterize, that's a moving estimate, and when you say what we offer, how would you generally characterize that is seeing these benefits?
Oh, what we're offering?
Yeah.
What we're offering is, we are offering a no judgment, safe place to be. And we don't require, these are adults. They don't need to be told when to eat, sleep, and poop. These are adults who can't live in our society normally by society's rules. And what you do is you then put ridiculous amounts of rules on them to qualify for going to base camp or any of your other shelters. And if they can't do it in the base, normal human societal way that you all seem to think is the one way to do everything in this world, why do you think that adding more rules and more institutionalized trauma and more of that kind of crap, they don't jive with it? They don't work that way. They never have, and that's the whole point. Anytime you constantly abuse and traumatize somebody with authority, like cops and like foster family stuff and court stuff, and then you go and you make some place like base camp where you have a bedtime as a 30-year-old who's just been out, like, It's ridiculous to even think that that's a viable model to help these people. We don't do that. We treat them like individuals, we treat them like people, and we don't require anything of them more than the base respect that will not get the cops called on us. And even then, sometimes that's just not attainable, but we treat them like adults and humans, and we just facilitate what they want to do with their lives. And it's working for 80% of them.
To me, a grown man coming to me with tears in his eyes and thank me for treating him like a human being.
I've had that like every day.
All we're doing is treating them like humans, and they are thriving.
Yep.
They are volunteering. They are part of the creation of this cooperative, and we are providing this space that hasn't existed yet.
Au contraire, I saw it for a long time when we were running HomesNOW stuff.
Yes.
And then when we go out in the shower, all that stuff, let me tell you, it's the
But it
same.
doesn't exist out
It's the same amount of community, the love, the
Yep.
compassion, the acceptance, there's no judgment, just you, nothing. that
We're
you-
partners, we're not their bosses, we work with them.
Nothing you've done is that, no reason you don't deserve a shower, that's for sure. And you just go from there with people, and one step at a time, they just blossom right in front of you.
Yes.
Okay, well,
In days, hours.
okay, well,
Seriously.
the one step today, whether it's tonight or tomorrow morning, is we'll get the electricity and the water on.
Thank you.
Humanizing is great, we'll meet on Monday.
Good.
All right.
And is it okay if we call this a wrap?
Yes.
Do y'all feel like it may be productive to have another meeting with the mayor before the meeting on Monday? I'm just curious, honestly. Because I feel like I've had some more questions as far as like CARES funding and continuing the discussion about liability. I'm just really interested in continuing this conversation and even looking forward to Amy's points about permanent housing solutions. I'm very open to make myself available to continue this conversation as long as it needs to.
From that standpoint, I'm available anytime you want to, I love it.
I got Friday free.
I think I'm really thriving here. Sorry, this is where I kind of, again, back to like camp interactions. Kind of go back, I watched these two campers actually. One of them was back when they just got their check, and one guy was trying to go and try to make a score downtown. And the other guy was like, oh man, like what about like getting more tents for like other kids in particular, you know, like after hearing a lot of awful things that happened at base camp, people are still trying to get out, you know, and a lot of campers recognize that we didn't have enough supplies and we're running out of basic learning supplies, and they're like, well, what if you just what if we just all, both of us, like walk down to like the store, and I saw them essentially leave camp together. I got kind of like worried, but then they came back with a bunch of emergency blankets. I literally actually broke down the tent. I won't do it again in here, because like it's not my person, but like watching those to like leave camp and then come back with even more emergency supplies,
Yeah.
actual emergency grade for actual like imaginary. Like watching them spend that on that and not joke, like that actually broke my heart in like the most beautiful ways that it could have been.
Yeah.
Honestly, because that was when they were committed to like sobering each
Yep.
other.
Yep.
All of these people are still struggling with addiction, don't have even the resources but each other, and as cliche as it is, MLK said one of my favorite quotes ever is, the self cannot be the self without other selves. I was just reminded that like these are like actually volunteering here again, and they used to be one of like my go-tos to pick me up, because community is the only thing that like humans need. You know, like we're naturally like sociable creatures, but when you start to ostracize and otherize, you end up in situations exactly like this. The second you decide that you're no longer going to invest in another person for any reason, you've already decided you're never going to be able to work on yourself in that regard again. And I don't know, that just made me realize that I never want to give up on any aspect of myself, so who am I to give up on someone else, you know? And when we stop trying to find permanent solutions to temporary problems or like temporary emergencies, you're always going to keep seeing them again and again, you know? If we don't want I personally cannot stand getting super emotional over and over again, watching people overcome and discover basic skills of empathy. It's beautiful, but it's also so painfully heartbreaking because they should never have been in that position in the first place, you know? Nobody should have ever given up on them when they needed to go to rehab a third, fourth, or fifth time. It doesn't matter how many times it's taken in the past. We now have to give people as many chances as they need with like any sort of permanent housing solution. I think it's just time that we all just kind of embrace each other.
Addiction is a symptom, not the issue. Addiction is always in response to a trauma, whether it be physical or mental or emotional. Every single addict has problems. The addiction is the symptom of the issues at hand, which are mental health, community, and what Amy was saying about us giving up on humans. We did not, if we wanted to be a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work by yourself society, we would have stayed hunters and gatherers, but we decided to do agriculture. That put us in a society where we all have to work together and help each other. That's how we formed this society. We can't work in a society that we formed as a literal collective of people working together and tell everybody to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and do it by themselves when we've literally spent the last several thousand years working together to form societies and towns and cities and governments and all these things.
Thank you, Melissa.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just
So,
we're evolved. Act like it.
I appreciate what you just said. There's a good phrase there. Community is the only thing humans need.
And I'm really interested to meet with your community and planning department
Yes.
this week.
Very much so.
And I hope that you will engage this group once more. It sounds like there's more conversation that they want to have.
And it'll be good for us too, you know, to kind of like prepare ourselves for what more clarity we need to bring into the meeting with
For
the
sure.
community and planning department and the legal department.
We're going to learn from each other. Like I said, when I came in here, I meant that word Seth. This has been great access, great, helps me understand myself better. Because when people ask me questions why, I can say, well, there's myriad reasons why. And it's not always easy news to tell, as you know. You know, when you look at somebody that wants something, you say, there's reasons why not sometimes. But I just really don't want to miss the opportunity. Everybody always said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I think we should.
A wheel has square edges.
You know, so
With that, I appreciate you all coming in. I look forward to Monday. We'll set out some, we'll communicate, you two are in touch. We'll communicate and identify a time we can get together on Monday.
great.
And so, yeah, I want to be sure if you need to reach out to Eve or just grab a picture of her notes about those talking points or those different things that we wanted to
No, I
get
got
to
it.
email to you.
We're good.
I know how to reach you.
Okay, yeah.
Because Janice is a peach.
All right, thank you.